Well, good morning, everybody. Before you might ask, yes, I am standing up. I hope you can see me. I know you can hear me. I hope you can see me. I used to always complain about getting stuck with the last presentation on the last day. I gotta say, the first presentation on a Sunday morning probably sucks a little bit worse than that. Raise your hand if you're actually in the Zope or Python or Plone community. Okay, so we have a few of us here. Any of you who are in the community and know me know that it's ludicrously funny for me to be giving a developer talk. I'm in marketing, but I have a trick for everybody today, and you'll love my trick for how I pull this off. As an introduction, I'm Paul Everett from Zia Partners. We are a nonprofit business partner network of the people who build Zope and Plone. Really interesting concept, organized primarily in Europe. We're headquartered. Gautois is, how do you say the word for people from Brussels? Do you say Bruxellian?
Bruxellois.
Bruxellois? That's a good name for a project. So any of you from Brussels, Zia Partners is headquartered in Louvain-la-Neuve, and Gautois is from that city as well. Xavier Hayman, you might see him today, is the head of Zia Partners. I'm also the president of the Plone Foundation and former co-founder of Zope Corporation. So although I may not write a lot of code, I get to hang around with the people who do. Just as a little bit of background, how many of you, raise your hand if you're awake. Yeah, that wasn't your question. Next time, don't give these speakers water, give them coffee, because if the speaker falls asleep during his own presentation, it's a bad sign. How many of you actually do anything with web development? All right, cool. There was a hand back there. Hey, JavaScript counts as web development. I hope it does. Raise your hand if you do PHP. All right, pretty cool. Raise your hand if you do Java. All right, I had a joke ready for that, but too many of you raised your hands. I couldn't get away with it. Raise your hand if you think you need a content management system. Hey, now we're getting right to the chase. Of course, all of the people who were in the business of selling such a thing to you just took pictures and wrote down all of your names. You're going to get bugged later about that. Okay, so for 40 years I lived in France. Just moved back. And in all those years, I never got a chance to come to FOSDEM. I moved back to the U.S. in August, and here I am. What's the sense of that? I'd like to note that this is a picture of my wife after the World Cup victory. With this presentation, you can just chill out. I know I am, because I did no work for this presentation. I have screencasts for everything. It's all available off of that URL, or it will be later on. The hotel had it. It's really fun to wake up in the morning of your presentation and put the last finishing touches, the 99% that you write at the end of the presentation. And the Orange web service inside your hotel takes your credit card transaction. It completed that part, but the part where it actually assigns you an IP address failed on that. So the slides aren't in the material, aren't actually updated yet, but they will be. In summary, Plone 2.5 is the release version right now. Plone 3 is being worked on. Has a lot of really good and useful user features for content management systems like versioning. Also has some exciting development stuff too. Most of what I'm going to talk about today is the development part. At the end, I'm going to do something really stupid and use the trunk to give a few demos of some user features. The things we're going to talk about are a little bit about the new ways in the world of Plone, and to a degree the worlds of Zope and Python, for how you get a developer sandbox installed, how you do your work and share it with other people. We're going to talk about Gautois' project for doing Ajax, and why I say useful. Also a little bit about portlets to show some of the stuff in our stack that's coming up, and then finally a tour through some features. So what's going on with Plone 3? Major new release. This is a screenshot of the page for the release. Oh, I can get mine. Very cool. That manages the roadmap. These are the crack smoking attempts at predicting the future. And these are the clips that go, what's called a clip of Plone improvement proposal, where you write down what you plan to do, get somebody to agree with it, and schedule it for release. Pretty interesting approach to managing work. Lots of new stuff coming in 23. Let's go ahead and get started, jump right into it. We'll show a demo about getting a sandbox installed, and then whenever I give a presentation, I pretend that I was listening to a presentation. What would I like to hear as a presentation? I know what you'd really like is a bunch of slides with 18 bullets in a 4-point font, and the presenter reading them to you as if he was standing in a university lecture hall with whiteboards. But you don't want that, I don't want that, so I'm going to show things to you first and then explain to you later. So the first demo, these are the people involved in the work on getting this part of the presentation working, for getting a sandbox built. That's not California, there's this big thing on top of the United States. What's that thing called? Canada, yeah. I like to make fun about the fact that Americans don't really know. Funny enough, we just passed the tipping point of absurdity. 50% of kids in the United States can't find the United States on a globe. Okay, so we're in the great world of 2007, which is 10 years after the Zope application server started coming out. And things have started to change in our stack. At the Python level, Python is starting to get a system for packaging things up and distributing them to other people and declaring dependencies. These are called eggs. And has a system for getting these eggs and installing them that is somewhat deceptively called easy install. And then interesting things also going on in the Python world about how web applications can work together. The nice thing about Python is it's so easy to write a web application, which is also the worst thing about Python, is that everybody does write a web application. So in an attempt to try and share some of this stuff, there is a web services gateway interface, WSGI. And this is an attempt to let Python stuff work into this. I sound like I'm in the Spinal Tap. On top of these advances in Python, there are attempts to try and manage the entire process of getting every bit that you might need, including your own bits, configuration information, etc., wrapping them up into recipes that you can send to other people. This is built out and working. And then finally, an attempt to change. Does anybody use Rails? Okay, cool. So Rails brought out this idea that you can press a couple of buttons and your entire project will be written for you, and then you can just happily work on invoicing the client, scaffolding. And so Python systems are trying to work on that kind of scaffolding, primarily with something called a system called PACE, which is really nice because you can, instead of telling people the 15 things they need to do, you can create one of these, install it as an egg, and then someone can run a simple command and have a setup built for them ready to go, including passwords and stuff like that. And benefits of these are pretty obvious. I'm dumb. Every time I try to do something, I wind up bugging them. Bugging one of the core developers. So instead of me bugging them, they just give me one of these scaffolding things. I run it. I get a shiny pony. And then I can play with my pony and not bug them anymore. And so scaffolding is written for people like me. The other benefits are we get to leverage some of the work, being a little bit more Pythonic, leverage some of the advances of Python. And the really cool thing is it's great for hard drive manufacturers because every time you can run one of these things, you get the universe installed in a new directory on your system. 200 megabytes for free. Think of all the value. Okay, so let me go over and do my demo for this one. I try to embed this into my presentation, but Keynote loves QuickTime, doesn't love Flash. Okay, so this is my screencast to show the system I'm using for getting all these bits installed, well documented. You can run a single command to go get all your stuff. This is what I'm going to run. Me actually doing it. Easy installs a little bit like CPAN or Ruby Gems or something like that. A registry out on the web where people put packages. You can run a single command that will go get all the dependencies for you and install them. In this case, I've already installed it, so processing dependencies. For this system that I'm doing, Plone, you set a couple of environment variables to point at some of the bits you need, and then after that, everything gets done for you. This has recipes for getting Plone 3 from the trunk, which is a wonderful experience. Or getting a release. And this is the part that I like the most, being as dumb as I am, is, I'll pause that real quick, is that I can run a command, and it will start asking me the questions to configure the site, just like you would expect from one of these scaffolding-oriented projects. Then it goes, gets whatever tools it needs, installs them. Next thing I'm going to do, now that I have an entire self-contained Plone environment, this is kind of the neat part of it, is that with other packaging systems, you might be fighting, like RPM or something like that, you might be fighting with the systems packages. And every time that I would use RPM, invariably my libc would get upgraded. You know, it would trace the cookie path all the way back to libc, and I thought, if I say yes to this question, I'm going to have an unmovable system. With this, it's a package system that can be completely self-contained, which is really nice. So the next thing is to run the scaffolding thing, or install the thing that's going to allow me to run scaffolding-oriented projects. And now I'm going to actually run the scaffolding command. There it is, paste or create. I'm going to choose a template. People out there that are making life easy for Paul create different templates, one for Plone 3, one that involves archetypes, one that involves this, that, and the other thing, one for a shopping cart, whatever. You can get and install these templates and then just answer questions. What each one of these will do is ask you a set of questions about what you want in order to have something ready to go out of the box. Here it goes asking a series of questions, for example, all the meta information that might go into the package index. And then I'll just unfortunately, I don't have the advanced control of this. It's speed up. But here it goes, spewing a bunch of bits on my system. And then I can do the chant to make this active and then run the server and the ability interface for it. So that'll catch up in just a second. So with all of this work, what's happening is more and more people start to adopt these advances in Python and these advances in these web systems to be able to go and get packages, install them really easily, create packages, share them with other people, track your dependencies, create built-in configurations. Any of you that might do customer work, this is just awesome, because the days where you'd have to log into their system and do 20 or 30 things in order to get them started, you can just send them a recipe. Hopefully you can still build them for those 30 hours, but it won't take them too to do it. Okay, so that's the first part of the presentation on packaging. On to some more exciting stuff in the Plone 3 release. Ajax is appearing in lots of web systems these days, and in the beginning I described it as useful and simple, because the work that Godefroy and others are doing in Plone is to go after some specific usability issues to reduce trips to the server, to have boxes that reflect changes with each other, and to also make it simple so that the kinds of people who create valuable things in Plone today can create valuable things that include Ajax. The KSS approach is to be declarative, which I really like. They use something that looks exactly like a CSS style sheet. It's sent to the browser. The browser then interprets that and sets up your various Ajax behaviors for you. It means you have a very limited, well-described universe of things that you can do. Those are client actions. Then they talk to things on the server called server actions. The server has a really interesting approach where it will bundle up a unit of work, send it back for execution on the client. That's what we'll see in the demo. Oh, look. Got to go put the foot for that. Do you know the foot number? Okay, so on to the demo for this. We're going to break this into two parts of the demo. One for the client action stuff. So in this case, what we want to do is, let me pause this real quick. We want to extend the behavior of Plone so that when you click on the description field that appears on every page, something happens. And we'll walk through the process of first showing how you get the client set up with the CSS declarative language, and then have something happen on the server. The first thing that they show you in the KSS team is to get your client environment set up. Everybody uses Firebug these days as the way to send output debug messages somewhere useful instead of in the workbox. These are some of the debug messages that you get default by the core of KSS. A little bit chatty, so one of the first things the second thing they tell you to do is go turn all that stuff off. For those of you that have never seen Zope before, Zope has this thing called the Zope Management Interface, which is a UI that's been there for a long time for configuring the application server. In this case, we're going to go into the part of Plone that lets you configure all the style sheets that go into your site that get included for various conditions. And we just temporarily disabled two of the style sheets, the ones that spew all those messages. Once we get that started, once we get Firebug under control and get the debug messages under control, the next thing we're going to do is actually create a little hello world style sheet. Usually you do this on the file system so that you can just check it into Subversion and send it to people. But when you're giving a demo, you want to do it the fastest way possible. Once you get something working, you'll harden it later. So with Zope, you're able to go and create things through the web. Create templates and files and style sheets. In this case, I'm going to create a style sheet through the web that has some of this KSS declarative language in it. So this is the part, in my opinion at least, of KSS it looks like CSS, it feels a lot like CSS. We're doing a CSS identifier to say this DOM node, the archetypes field name description, is going to have what feels like a CSS selector, but in this case, instead of hover or something like that, it's the click event. And then it's going to have this configuration information associated with it. This stuff in the middle here is obviously unique to KSS. It would be considered an invalid normal CSS style sheet. Once we have the style sheet included, we go back over to the thing you just saw, the CSS registry, and tell Plone, okay, I've got a new style sheet for you. You need to include it in all the pages. But in this case, the style sheet's a little bit special. It's not a normal CSS style sheet. It is of this type. Here we're linking to the file name over in the Zope system that we just created. We put the kind of relationship we want, and since we're in debug mode, we want to turn off some of this other performance-oriented stuff. Once that's done, and we add this directive to Zope CSS registry. By the way, I'm talking in the background on all of the screencast stuff, so you can listen to me explain all this stuff. And we reload the page, then I can go and click on the description and see the first thing I do for debugging is go make sure that the stuff I configured works. I go look for the style sheet, and yes, there's the style sheet. It is linked in like we just told the CSS registry to do. I want to go check Firebug, see if I totally dorked it up. No, I didn't. It was able to find that style sheet. It was able to parse it. And it actually interpreted those rules. If I put a bogus rule in there, but it told me I don't know what you're doing. Close Firebug, and now, I wonder if this will work. I wonder if this will work. Oh, this is what's great about screencasting presentations. When I did that, when I actually recorded that, the first 5 times I clicked that, it didn't work. I just went in the screencast, deleted that part. Error fixed. Debugging through screencast. All my presentations go perfectly. Okay, so that's pretty silly, you know. We're just putting up a static message. Let's do something a little bit more interesting. Let's put a custom alert message. So the idea here is that on each one of these directives in KSS that match up to something in the client-side DOM, I'm putting some instructions for what's supposed to happen. I just added another instruction. And there's lots of things we can do. Now that's kind of the easy side from a developer's perspective. This is all that silly CSS, JavaScript crap. What happens on the server, because we want these boxes to interact with the server, send it information, get information, update things in the browser. That's the next demo. Okay, so this is where we talk about the connection between that client-side stuff you just saw and the server-side stuff. In this case, we want clicking on the description to send a message to the server. It does some work and send a result back. This is my sandbox setup, the entire Plone site. And Godflaw told me the easiest way to cheat on this is to go hijack his module instead of creating a brand new product and registering it and all of that. So I'm going to go down into the KSS package, find a little configuration point, hijack it, and wire all my stuff out. In this case, the configuration point that I'm hijacking is the configuration language for Zope called ZCML configuration markup language. This is what one of those files looks like, and I'm going to add in some directives. What this directive is doing is essentially adding a new URL to Zope. The URL is going to be registered for instances of that content type. I say content type, but I won't explain the difference. This is the name of the new URL, and that's the code that it's going to run. Since it points to a Python module. We'll open up a Python module and paste some stuff into it that Godfrey told me to paste and understand what it's doing. Ooh. I'm getting confused between my screens, which one on this side as well. Okay, so over to the Python module. Pretty small amount of code for the amount of stuff that it's doing. We get a subclass from the hard work that Godfrey has done for us. A view that handles the client-server interaction. This is the thing that handles the URL. It's passed an argument. It does a little bit of work. And then insert magic here. It packages up it's almost like X. It sends a set of instructions back to the X server and tells it to do some stuff in the browser. Okay, so once we get that code done, we restart the server and we go check to see if it works. We're going to go and put a new URL on the URL bar, see if we get a response. And we did. You see response 1 up there. You see the argument I passed to that Python method, and the value for that argument calculates the time on the server and sends the string back that here's the string that we're passing on that URL. And that's where everything matches on this side. That's in the URL, that's in the query string, the value as the argument on the query string gets put in there. Now we know that the client side works, we know the server side works, let's wire the two up together. And the wiring happens in that CSS language. So let's go back to that CSS file. Remember we were authoring that CSS file through the web browser. We're going to go open that thing up again, and we're going to put these extra directives that say when I click on this node, go and run this action on the server, send it this argument, get its results back and do something. And it took longer to explain that than type it. Not a very large amount of code for that. And now once I reload the page and click on it, I'll get the alert box first because that was the first directive I had. But then the next thing that's executed is pretty interesting. It went and found another box on the page, the portal actions box, and it shoved the results into that portal action. And the thing that was saying, go find this box and shove stuff into it, is actually the Python code on the server. The Python code, to a degree, took control of the browser and told it what to do. There you see on line 13, it's saying go find that ID and do something with it. So that's the server side of KSS. Back to the presentation. So the two benefits that you get immediately from KSS, the first is that Godfrey and Balash have done most of the work to make Plone out of the box take advantage of this. I have another screencast I'll put on the site that shows using some of the stuff from KSS. For example, you can go to the title on a page, click in it, get the edit box, save it, and another box on the page will update itself. The recent changes box will update itself. It will be told to update itself with KSS. And if you make a mistake like putting an empty value in, the form error will happen without a trip to the server to replace the page. The other thing that's nice about it is, in addition to having it be more useful out of the box, you as Plone developers can leverage this to make your own Plone applications easier, and you can do it with this declarative style approach where you don't necessarily have to learn anything about JavaScript. Okay, so that's the Ajax part. On to the third part of the presentation about portlets, done by these two guys. That's a cool picture here. what we want to show in this, well, actually, I'm just going to do the demo first. What we want to show is how Plone has recently been a content management system, less of an intranet. One of the big things for intranets is portlets, the ability to collect information in the boxes on page and let users manage those boxes to turn them on, turn them off, whatever. And so the portlet system for Plone 3 tries to bring some of these intranet use cases into the world of Plone and do so in an architecturally sound way. So rather than write a portlet from scratch as part of a screencast, I'm going to go hijack an example portlet and just make a minor modification to it. So I'm going to check out that package into the products area of my Plone developer site. And once I get that, I'm going to open it up and make a couple of changes. So here's my product site. I'm going to dive down into my portlet, the thing that I checked out. In the configuration language for Zope, one of the interesting features is it's extensible. So instead of making people do a lot of extra work, we wrote a very specific directive only for the purpose of configuring a new portlet that is then made available to everybody. Here is the user interface for that portlet. Pretty simple. And here's the code for that portlet, how it gathers up information and interacts with the user interface. I'm going to restart my server and go check and see if I can use this portlet. For those of you who might have used Plone in the past, you'd see a lot of error messages on startup with deprecation warnings and things. That's been cleaned up a lot in Plone 3. We see on the right and the left, we have examples of portlets. We also have this, So the first thing we have to do is that's a new package that I just created. We need to make it available to this particular Plone site. So I'm going to go install that package. The My Portlet package is now available. So I can use it in the portlet interface. This is one of the first benefits from the portlet work that Martin here did. Is you have a web-based approach that each person or the site administrator can do to change the portlets on the site. You can reorder them using the KSS, AJAX stuff, moving them up and down, or I always turn off the calendar. It's the first thing I do. I like 2 columns. And I can add a new portlet. I'll add the portlet that I just created, the hello portlet. It requires a single thing for configuration, which is the message to display in this portlet. That was determined by the author, the creator of the portlet. That portlet is now available on every page of the site. I go back to the home page and I'll see the hello portlet. This is a neat thing about their system. Their system for Plone 3 portlets is you can configure a portlet to appear in a certain column based on what group a person is in. So not everybody will see the same thing. What content type they're looking at. So if you're looking at a news item, don't show a portlet about announcements. And you can also set up per user portlets. Now when I go back to one of the pages on the site, I will see the portlet available on the right with the message that I configured it to have. So with this approach, the world of adding portlets and intranet functionality is a lot more sane, usable for humans instead of programmers, and gets us into the path of starting to use some of the new features in the world of Zope, specifically the Zope 3 component architecture. And finally, the world of Zope is starting to use this thing called generic setup, where you saw in the KSS demo, I went and clicked around and added a bunch of stuff, and that was all really cool. But what happens if I want to share it with someone else or recreate the site later? Generic setup is a way to do a whole bunch of configuration, press a button, get everything about your configuration saved to a file for checking into Subversion. Running a little low on time as far as demos, so I will I'll go a little bit quick on this. I'll probably won't do a little. So this is actually running Plone locally. And for example, this is going to edit one of the pages. I'm running in debug mode, so it's a little bit slow. This is KSS acting right there. So for example, this is the inline editing of KSS. I'm going to change that to say welcome to FOSDEM. And the page changes somewhat inline, but also the recent changes box was also told to change itself because something happened, without really changing the entire page, the entire URL. Other things that are available in Plone 3, this is by far the big one. I'll just show it real quick instead of the whole thing. I can make a bunch of changes, and then when I save it, I have an option to do version control. Yay! Which is a very important feature for high-end content management systems to give end users the ability to do versioning. And so you see all the versions that I have. I can do diff, revert, add a new version with a comment message through here. This is also configurable, so you can do, for example, auto versioning. There's also a system called staging, which allows the public to see one site, one version of all the content while your content producers are working on it. Other things that we can do, Plone 3 has a system for link checking and validation. If I make a link from one page to another, if I go try and delete the target of the link, I will get a warning that it's linked to from other pages and the confirmation that I actually want to delete it. If I move things from page from one place to another, if I go to the old URL, I'll be redirected to the new URL. Wiki functionality where I can put double parens around phrases and just in the middle of the page, not a special content type. So what's really nice about this is I could have a purchase order content type that I wrote myself, put a rich text field in the middle of it, and it will get wiki functionality. Just because this the wiki system is available for anything that has a rich text field in it. Also indexing of office content using the WVWare libraries, several other features. So that's a little bit of a talk about Plone 3. I guess I have about 5 minutes left. Until 11. Oh, the schedule said 10:45. Okay. Well, we're going to be having a long coffee break then. Sorry, the thing I printed earlier had it stopped. Sorry. So this is a little bit of a run through for developers for Plone 3.0, a little bit of the user features as well. What's coming beyond Plone 3, the next release, Plone 3.5, is slated for work a little bit later this year. A lot more architectural stuff will happen on it. Same thing as the release page I showed you before. There are these clips that are being written and scheduled for that release. Performance, for example, is important for Plone 3.5. Actually, some good things happening in Plone 3.5. There are also some things happening that I was involved in yesterday that are happening in our community, hopefully with other communities, that go a little bit beyond code for Plone 3, or future things happening with Plone. Some of us are starting to get involved with some EU activities based around false software, having to do with quality measurements, other kinds of metrics and how this can establish a sense of maturity about open source for governments to make evaluations, but also commerce in Europe to make evaluations. The projects that were presented yesterday that we're involved with a little bit, they're all about collecting metrics, collecting information, doing really rigorous analysis of that, finding out what are the trends, how can we establish the difference between a quality project and a high quality and a low quality project, what are some of the case studies, and all of this is, I view all of this as important and things that we should talk about within our communities because we want to succeed beyond each other. We all know that it's good. How do we convince other people that it's good? Unfortunately, component architectures are not the best way to convince a decision maker to adopt your software. There is, unbelievably, some skepticism out there about how we do what we do. And it just takes a while. It takes things that we don't know how to do very well in order for us to mature beyond our natural allies. How do we reach some of these skeptics? And the way I look at it is we, involved in these projects, we need to make a decision to engage some of these activities and participate in it because it's good for us. We alone will never be able to reach these people and convince them. They hate revolution. They like safe, measured approaches. Some of these projects are doing the work for us. They want to help us. They want to come to us and say, let us do it for you. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is let us help you. So if you get a chance to work with some of these projects and talk with them, go to presentations later, please do, because I think it's the kind of thing that open source isn't always good at, strategic kinds of things. How do we see the big picture? How do we do things that make an impact farther out? These are the people that are doing it for us, particularly in the EU, it's important. If we help them get involved inside of our projects, they will do the work to help us explain outside of the flaws for us. So, on to the best word for any presentation. In conclusion, that'll be the URL for all this material. Plone 3 is coming. Plone 3 is available now, should be in beta within the next couple of weeks, should be released sometime in May. You'll note that I didn't say what year. And Plone continues with Plone 3. The world of Plone continues to grow up. From a feature perspective, it's growing up with things like versioning and staging, which are usually part of the high-end domain of content management systems. It's growing up in terms of how it views itself in the larger world of its stack with the Zope application server and the Python programming language. We're trying to do work at the right level of the stack, getting involved with eggs, getting involved with Zope Free. Trying to grow up a little bit on the legal front. Plone Foundation is really interesting as we try to manage the group rights for everyone in Plone, protect and promote Plone. So we have around 92 members, board of directors in existence for 4 years, have about 35 grand in the bank. And we own the copyright for Plone. We can speak on behalf of Plone. And that is, unfortunately, in the content management world, there are so many content management products. I swear to God, during my presentation, somebody wrote a content management system and published it. And it might be good, but I doubt the world needs the 12,001st content management system. So as some of the content management systems get bigger, Drupal is after me, some of the ones at the top, you start to see us investigate things less about code, more about maturity, more about legal stuff. The people involved with Drupal and Joomla and some of the other systems, we all work with each other about sharing information on how to run foundations, for example. And I view that part as just as important as code, because we want what we do is so good, we've got to share it with other people, and those people care about things like that. And finally, the Plone community continues to grow. I got invited to speak in Japan next month. So the more it grows, the more places I get to go. So if you're interested in content management, if you're interested in big communities, lots of fun, a project with a logo that has its own color, Norwegian blue, and a logo that looks like a Scandinavian light socket, and good content management, then take a look at Plone. Ask me any questions afterwards if you have them. Any questions now before we wrap up? No? If you see me at a bar later on, remember the first speaker of the day gets free beer for the rest of the conference. All right, thanks everybody.